The following program is a production of the Barroom Network. It is intended for all audiences.
Doug Buffone.
This defense sucks. This is moronic.
John Buffone.
If your best run plays are coming off end arounds, there's a problem.
Doug was behind the microphone first. He never held back.
Very difficult to score when your offense is on the bench. When your defense is out there giving up 70, 80, 70, 64-yard drives.
Now, it's his nephew, John, and there's no holding this Buffone back either.
The biggest thing that affected Justin Fields was a coaching change, and now he has an offensive coordinator, and he actually will fit a scheme to the quarterback, something we have not seen in a long time.
I've had it. I have had it. I want somebody to get kicked in the ass.
When I see Twitter polls and national media and fans weighing in on who is going to have the number one overall pick in the 2023 draft, and I see people commenting Chicago and it's not even close, then yeah, you know what? I'm going to get a little defensive.
I got my ass whipped many times, but I tell you, I took somebody down with me.
I don't think the Bears are a 2 to 3 win team. So to answer your question, no. The Bears aren't going to be the worst team in the NFL.
It's Buffone 55, the John Buffone Show. Hello and welcome to another edition of Buffone 55, a fast-paced approach at breaking down those lovable Chicago Bears. I'm your host, John Buffone, and with me, as always, is my co-host and producer, Alyssa Barbieri. Alyssa, the Bears drop another close one, and they do it to the lowly Detroit Lions. How are you feeling after that?
I mean, that was a rough one to swallow, especially as you know, I have a lot of family that are Lions fans. So, they let me have it a little bit, but I am over here just basking in the glory that Justin Fields is my quarterback. So I'll take it.
It's little victories, but we're looking long-term, which is something we're trying to do better at, looking at the long-term vision of what's going to happen rather than the short-term, and we'll see what they can do against the Falcons this week. Speaking of which, we got an awesome guest tonight to help us get ready for those Atlanta Falcons, but just in case, on the weird off chance that this is your first time listening or watching Buffone 55, Alyssa, can you give us a breakdown of how this show's been running for the last 6 years?
Absolutely. So Buffone 55 has 3 segments, and we always begin with our guest. And this week, we'll be talking to Scott Kennedy, who will help us preview this week's matchup against the Falcons. That's followed by our B55 segment. That's when I ask John 5 questions, and his responses must be completed within 55 seconds. The 55 is John's way of paying tribute to the great Doug Buffone, his uncle, his mentor, and a man who played 15 seasons with the Bears and wore number 55. We then finish things up with a free-for-all we call Buffone's Basement, where John and I welcome in Aldo Gandia and kind of just let out all of our emotions on the current state of the Bears. With all that being said, John, take it away.
Thank you, Alyssa. Like you said, our guest tonight is Scott Kennedy, whose YouTube channel is a super source for Atlanta Falcons information, along with a lot of different things. He's also the former director of scouting for Scout.com and content operations VP at Sports Illustrated. Scott, thank you so much for being on Buffone 55. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I appreciate the invite. I love talking football. So I did an earlier show at the beginning of the year with some Chicago Bears, and I'm looking forward to doing it again.
These are 2 interesting teams that are obviously in a phase where they're looking towards the future, but Atlanta has shown some sparks throughout this year. So I want to start with the head coach. Hired back in 2021, Arthur Smith now has 27 games under his belt and I believe 11-16 record. For Bears fans who are not familiar with Arthur Smith, can you tell us a little bit about his relationship with the media, which some social media clips appear him as potentially being a salty guy, as you may have put it in one of your videos?
I think he's got a pretty good media interpersonally with the folks, and the Atlanta media, the Southern hospitality, they are notoriously soft anyway. So the fact that he gets salty with them a little bit rubs me a little bit the wrong way. I'm like, these guys are easy, dude. These are real easy. But if you ask any of them afterwards, they'll say no. That's what he's like in person, what he's like in camera are actually 2 different things. But again, he doesn't have the track record I always think of back to Bull Durham. You win 20 in the show, you can let the fungus grow back on your shower shoes. Until you win 20 in the show, it just means you're a slob. Well, you win 5 Super Bowls, you can Bill Belichick your way through whatever you want to. Until then, you're kind of an a-hole. So I think he kind of needs to earn that a little bit. That said, the Atlanta Falcons were a train wreck when he took over, and I think he is really, really overachieved with this bunch right now. We can get into however you want to. I don't want to monologue here, but I think Arthur Smith and Terry Fontenot, the new general manager, they came in together last January, a year and a half ago. I think they've done a fantastic job with what was just an awful situation left by the previous regime and Thomas Dimitroff, who was criminally negligent in building this team.
And Scott, some of the questions that Coach Smith have had to address over the last couple of weeks is about quarterback Marcus Mariota and whether the team should make that switch to rookie Desmond Ridder. And I'm curious, what's going on with Mariota's play that has him apparently on the hot seat?
It's just for Mariota, one, and I've had people come and ask me this, say like he was loved when he was in Tennessee. He was loved when he was with the Raiders. How come he hasn't been embraced by the Atlanta Falcons fans? One, it's because he came in immediately as a bridge quarterback. Two, he's basically being seen as this is his third year. You get what you get. So people are like, I don't want to like him too much. He's going to be gone soon anyway. So could he come in and make this job his own long term? The opportunity was there. Is he going to? I don't think so. I still think he's probably too. His overall numbers look solid. The problem is if you put each game on a line graph, it's going to go like this, up and down, and then the line through it's going to be, well, look, his numbers are okay. Yeah, but he's so inconsistent. And for a 7th, 8th year guy who's supposed to be a steadying presence for this team, it hasn't really been good enough. But for my and set your expectations super low, you're never disappointed. For my expectations, he's been fine. I was told a girlfriend of mine she looked fine, and triggers me still because I got yelled at. Fine, I look fine. He's been fine.
That's it's almost not what you want to hear. You either want to hear great or awful. You never want to hear fine, but
you look fine. I look fine. Oh God, that was 30 something years ago. I still cringe when I hear the word fine.
Sticking with the quarterback position, I do want to go to a listener question here from Jordan. He says, Scott, what are the local reports saying about Desmond Ridder's practice performance? Is he ready? And I want to kind of expand on that a little bit. Are the fans ready for him?
See, that's the problem with practice reports is the media is not allowed to come in and watch practice. So we haven't seen Desmond Ridder since the preseason where he looked good. He looked good in the preseason. And, he had 40-something starts, very prolific passer at Cincinnati, 4.52 in the 40 at the NFL Combine. The guy's an athlete. All the things you talk about Mariota, he may not have the wiggle that Mariota does as far as, the pure running ability, but if I'm in trouble and I need to pull the ball down, he can scoot. But he looked really good. So I've said, we as fans, we as media, we don't need to see him on the field to know. Maybe they already know. Maybe he has looked that bad. We don't know that. I always say questions are easy, answers are hard. How has he looked in practice? Has he looked that bad in practice? Because Marcus Mariota has cost his team a couple games, not completely on his own. I know too much blame, too much credit for the quarterback, of course. But if Desmond Ridder had 5 games under his belt, would he be trending higher right now for this 4-6 team? The problem is the NFL wants everybody to be about 500, so everybody thinks they have a chance. This is a 4-6 team that isn't very good. They're better than I thought they'd be, without a doubt, but they're a 4-6 team that isn't very good. But they're 1 game away from the division lead. We got to keep going the way we're going. If Marcus Mariota is not the long-term answer, what can the kid do?
stick around long enough to still be in the hunt in week 6, 17, 18, and see if you can get into that vaunted 7th seed that they created a couple years ago to see if you can squeak in. The Bears know all about that 7 seed. I don't think they raised any banners for that. But I want to stick with the offense, but I want to move over to the running game, because when playing at home, the Falcons have the 2nd best record for rushing yards, averaging around 188 yards per game. Can you break down the rushing attack a little bit for us? And I ask that because the Bears have the 3rd worst rushing defense on the road, and therefore need to exploit whatever weakness may be there. But could you give us a little bit of a breakdown on the rushing attack?
This isn't a great matchup for the Chicago Bears. They want to come out there. The Atlanta Falcons want to come in. They'd like to establish some balance, and when that doesn't work, Arthur Smith says to hell, we're just going to run the ball. And it doesn't matter if you get down 2 scores. They got down early to the Rams. They got down to the Bengals, and they just ran it 15 times and came back. They had a chance to beat the Rams, had a chance to beat the Buccaneers. We're in all of these games. They are a power running team. They can run a little read option with Mariota, so his threat with his legs is dangerous. But Tyler Algier, rookie running back, Caleb Huntley, a guy they brought up the practice squad, those dudes run angry. And then Cordero Patterson is back, and you guys got a chance to watch CP, but not like this. He runs out of the backfield like he's returning kickoffs. Like, it's going to be the last time he's ever going to touch the ball, which is why he gets banged up a little bit. But he is a dynamic weapon. So those 3 guys with Mariota and the improvement on the offensive line, which was god-awful last year, is the reason why this team is a lot more competitive than I was expecting them to be at the beginning of the season.
And over the last 2 drafts, the Falcons have acquired a couple of the most electrifying pass catchers that were available. In 2021, it was tight end Kyle Pitts, and this year it's for receiver Drake London. So I was wondering if you could evaluate their play for us, and who else should Bears fans look out for as potential big contributors in this game?
We can go back to this because I'll bring up the article where I said Justin Fields is the pick at 4. You had Matt Ryan in a big cap number. He's 36 years old. Now he's 37 and gone. You had no offensive line and no defense. What the hell good is a guy catching the ball going to do when it's like, with Ridley, Julio Jones, and Kyle Pitts, how are you going to stop this team? They're really going all in. Easy. I'm going to put the quarterback on his butt. And a defense that can't stop anybody. That's how. So it's you go back to this, and then they double down. So you've got 2 of these dynamic pass catchers averaging 35 yards a game, somewhere in there. When your quarterback situation is in flux, your offensive line is in flux, you've got a couple luxury positions as receivers. And I don't like to call Kyle Pitts a tight end. He's a receiver. He's a pass catcher. That said, both of these guys are incredibly young. Kyle Pitts came into the league at 20 years old, Drake London at 21. Arthur Blank, the owner, isn't the old Rankin Smith of old where every free agent is gone. He will pay these guys, and they could be long-term building blocks. But my first choice was trade down because you've got a zillion holes on your team. My second choice was Justin Fields. He's from Kennesaw, Georgia. I watched him play in high school. You see the tools. It's so obvious what he can do, what he's capable of. I thought he would have been a perfect pick for the Falcons at 4 2 years ago. Now they're asking questions like, what are we going to do at quarterback? I wonder. What could you have done?
Hindsight is certainly 2020, but you're right. You sometimes you get all these luxury picks for a team that really needs to, before you put the nice rims on the car, maybe you should make sure it has an engine. And so it's
John, I've said that a zillion times. Like, what? Again, I say luxury, but you say when you're troubleshooting things, you start, what's the first thing that can break? It's like, okay, my refrigerator's not cold. Well, is the circuit breaker working? Is there any power to it? And if there's no power to it, I don't care if there's Freon in the fridge or not. It doesn't matter. Kyle Pitts and Drake London are the Freon at this point. And if your quarterback and offensive line aren't good enough, it doesn't matter how good your receivers are. And we could get into the Cincinnati Bengals and their offensive line and say the exception that proves the rule, but they still weren't as bad as the line was last year. And they already went and got their quarterback. The Falcons are going, we're not sure what we're going to do at quarterback.
Football and Freon. That's what you get on this podcast. We talk about refrigerators and football. There's a lot more in common than you think. But you mentioned that offensive line, and I want to bring that up because, listen, Scott, Jaquan Brisker is the leading sack getter for the Bears right now, and he's a safety. He has 3. At second, it's linebacker Roquan Smith, who is not on the team anymore. So that tells you how much pressure the front four is actually getting for the Chicago Bears. What's the state of this Falcons offensive line, and do the Bears have any chance of putting pressure on the quarterback?
Well, and that's what I was saying is it's not a great matchup for the Bears. The weakness right now, especially with an injury at left guard for the Falcons, is probably right up the gut. The center is susceptible. The left guard is susceptible. The right guard, Chris Lindstrom, is terrific. I'm a lifelong Atlanta sports fan. I undersell because, well, we Falcon it up and the curse and everything. Caleb McGarry, someone asked, I think Jordan asked early about Caleb McGarry. Caleb McGarry is another reason why this team, I think I picked him to be 2-15 at the beginning of the season, maybe 3-14. Caleb McGarry at right tackle, who is in a contract year, is playing really well at right tackle. Jake Matthews is a solid pro at left tackle. You are susceptible up the middle, but you don't have any interior linemen. Your interior defensive line is probably the weakest part of this defense that isn't doing very well. So it's weakness on weakness, and I think the Falcons will be able to run the ball. I don't want to say at will, but they're gonna. It wouldn't surprise me at all if they go for over 200 yards against the Bears in Atlanta this weekend.
Well, that's there's a roller coaster every game here, so it doesn't look like things are much better though for the Falcons when it comes to them jittering a pass rush, and that's we always like to see Justin Fields stay upright. Can you give us a rundown on the pass rush for the Falcons and what Bears fans can be expecting will be coming at that sometimes hodgepodge patchwork line that they put out there?
Yeah, you mentioned the having a bad rush. It actually feels like the Falcons have a pass rush this year because they're going to increase their output by about 50%. They had 18 sacks last year. 18. The next worst team, John, was 29. So they could have added a double-digit sack guy and still finished last. So their pass rush has improved. Rookie Arnold Ebiketie is playing really well out of Penn State, again, for a rookie. But, again, it was awful last year. I think Stephen Means, a starting edge rusher, hit the quarterback twice last year in 15 or 14 starts, twice, and it was the same game. 13 games, he didn't lay a paw on the quarterback, starting edge rusher. Lorenzo Carter is a competent pro. And then inside, Grady Jarrett's a handful. So, he's got to be dealt with. And then Taquan Graham is a second-year, fifth-round draft pick out of Texas that has taken a meteoric leap from last year to this year. Another one of those reasons why I said 2-15, 3-14 was the defensive line. I wasn't counting on Graham because they didn't bring anybody in. They don't have any money. They didn't have any money this year. They're playing with half a roster. I think they got about $107 million on the field out of a possible 210. So they didn't bring anybody in except a bunch of Bears cuts, guys that they got off of the Bears waiver wire or practice squad. So Graham's playing really well. The edges, Ebiketie and Carter, are okay. They're a promising rookie and a journeyman is where they are, which is leaps and bounds better than it was last year.
Well, it sounds like there could be opportunities moving forward. Let's move over to the secondary now, because one thing that the Bears fans would love to see is for Darnell Mooney and specifically Chase Claypool to get going vertically a little bit. And there has been some shuffling in that Atlanta secondary a little bit, a lot probably due to injury. So will there be opportunities for Justin Fields to go down the field a little bit on some deep balls?
And Cliff, it's the Atlanta tie bearers, because if they didn't come from Chicago, they came from Tennessee. And it was all off the waiver wire. So getting into that team building aspect, if you look at the two teams that have the most cap room next year, Bears and Falcons, it's going to be a fun offseason for these two franchises.
There's a plan
for a change. So it'll be a lot of fun. Yes, again, when I say the matchup for this team, Justin Fields is killing people with his legs, but he's only averaging about $150 through the air. The Falcons have the worst pass defense in the NFL. And it's been the worst for 2 out of the last 3 seasons. And the third one, they were 31st. So it's been bad for a while. AJ Terrell is a very good player at corner. He's missed the last 2 games. He was at practice for the first time today. After that, you've got a couple practice squad guys and veteran minimums because the starting corner they brought in to be a stopgap, Casey Hayward, is out on injured reserve. Safety Richie Grant played really well last week. Second-year guy Jalen Hawkins is okay. Isaiah Oliver is okay. So those are your 3 corners and 2 safeties. And with a not so good pass rush, this team can be had. They can be had through the air. They're much better against the run than through the against the pass. And I'm gonna make Justin Fields beat me with his arm. I'm gonna sell out with this defense.
Could be some opportunities finally for those Bears receivers to have a big game, big yardage game, a couple of touchdowns. We'll see. I'm trying to be the eternal optimist here, so we're hoping that we can see that. Let's switch to something that is always fun to talk about, special teams. Everyone loves talking about that third phase because, especially in Chicago, with Cairo Santos missing an extra point, a crucial extra point last week, their third-round pick, Velus Jones, has fumbled multiple punt returns, and then Khalil Herbert is gone on IR. So how do you feel about the Falcons special teams and who we should be keeping our eye on, whether it's a gunner, a punt returner, a long snapper? Who do we got to spotlight here?
One of the gunners who we mentioned, those defensive backs. If you see 28 in his dreads, Mike Ford out on the field on defense, target him, go after him. But he's been really good on special teams, so that's someone to watch. Avery Williams was drafted to be a return guy. He was a special teams player of the year or something, All-American out of Boise State. Why he was in on pass protection on the final drive, getting bowled over last week against the Panthers, is a question that I would have asked if I was sitting in the media room. That the media is not gonna. I've got it on the Friday. I think the Friday pod we did the day after or it was maybe Monday. Anyway. He's 180 pounds, former defensive back return guy, first year at running back because and he was in there pass protecting. But watch Avery Williams returning the punts. He's a good player. And then the kicker, Younghoe Koo, is, despite missing 2 last week, extra points, he had the second longest streak in the NFL for hitting extra points, and then he missed 2 in a row. Something was up last week. Something was up with the Atlanta Falcons last week. But special teams are pretty good. They're pretty good for the Falcons.
Weird parallels there because Cairo Santos, normally automatic, was actually having some issues kicking last week, which we always just blame on the turf at Soldier Field because we just assume that's what's doing it. But something to keep an eye on there as we move into Sunday. And before I ask you for an overall prediction of this game, I do want to ask you about Ryan Pace because it's a guy a lot of people in Chicago know well about. Has there been any kind of talk about Ryan Pace, specifically because of all the former Bears that have gone to Atlanta? Has there been any kind of talk about the former Bears GM?
Just some of the jokes that he's the one with his hand on the back of Terry Fontenot going like this, because every player that comes in, it's like, I make a joke now. I've got Control V for copy and paste former Chicago Bear when I'm writing any new personnel move. I'm like, he's got to have Bear ties. He has to. So it's been a running joke down here in Atlanta. But again, this team has $80 million in dead cap, an NFL record, 85 somewhere in there. But they ripped the Band-Aid off. They ate Matt Ryan's contract, and they're coming out with some money in last year. So what I'm hoping is they have learned how to be frugal and scout and spend and put a competitive team out there with half a payroll. So I'm interested to see what they can do now. Instead of going for $1 million veterans, let's step it up a little bit. I think there were 4 or 6 guys making over $4 million on this team. That's it. And you got $100 million available next year. I can have 25 guys making $4 million and just increase the depth, because that's where this team, the starting 11 is okay, but there's no depth. And everybody on this team is either on a 1-year deal or on a rookie contract. So it should be fun. I will be interested to see. Ryan Pace is, assistant general managers don't get in the news very much. His name is known because of all of the Chicago Bears. It's like, okay, who's really running the show here?
And it is interesting to see how many former Bears just joined the Falcons this year. And what you said,
Like Eddie Goldman.
Yeah, Eddie Goldman retired. And that sparked another question. I apologize, but I got to know, or at least get your opinion on, they did let Matt Ryan go, and obviously he's been benched in Indianapolis. So was that move, because that was a lot of dead cap to eat, and there had to be a lot of decision-making there. Was that more because they wanted to just move on from him and let him maybe go on to another opportunity, or did they see what Indy didn't see and say, this guy might be washed, let's see if we can get something for him?
Well, they screwed it up royally by going after Deshaun Watson, which was a owner-related move because he was a former ball boy with the Atlanta Falcons. I mean, the state of Georgia is number 4 in the country in producing NFL players. And so there's a lot of former NFL guys here. There's talent everywhere down here. So Deshaun Watson was a former ball boy, had a relationship with Arthur Blank. They go after Deshaun Watson despite all of his baggage, and they thought it was coming down to the Saints and the Falcons until the Cleveland Browns lost their mind and they browned it up. I was born in Akron, a suburb of Cleveland. So a Cleveland-born Atlanta sports fan, I'm a cynical SOB. I promise you that. But if anybody's going to screw it up worse than the Falcons, it will be Cleveland. And when they came in and did that, now, not only do you not get this polarizing, but talented young quarterback, you've made an ass of yourself in doing it. You've been left at the altar now, too. And Matt Ryan was like, okay, screw you guys. Get me out of here. That's why they only got they got a second third-round pick. They didn't even get the Colts' best third-round pick. Meanwhile, you got Russell Wilson going for a pair of twos, a backup quarterback, 2 starters, and 2 seconds for a 33-year-old Russell Wilson. And you get a third rounder for Matt Ryan. So their hand was forced because they screwed it up. But now, if you're willing to swing for the fences for Deshaun Watson, what kind of deal are you willing to put together for Lamar Jackson, pending free agent who will play on a franchise tag or not, or say I'm not playing? So
I was just
that's the talk down here. So they're going to go all in on Lamar.
Yeah, I was going to say, I got to ask, is it at the quarterback position, if you're hesitant to put Ritter in now because you think you might be able to squeak into some kind of playoff spot or whatever, you don't get a really good evaluation on him. And then if you have a top 15 pick, or you have all this cap space where you can go all in on someone like a Lamar Jackson, what do you do at the quarterback position then?
If you got a chance to get Lamar Jackson, you take it. For what if Arthur Smith is your coach and what you want to do, I mean, there would be very few players. Justin Fields might be one of them, that would, round peg, round hole for what Arthur Smith likes to do. You're setting guys up in play action. I don't want to say easy. Playing quarterback's not easy, but he's putting you in good situations. I mean, look at the difference between Steve Tannehill in Miami and year 1 under Arthur Smith playing in Tennessee. There's your example. Of what he can do in this offense. You'd like a more vertical passing game, but you got Drake London and Kyle Pitts. You need one more receiver. I got $100 million. I can go get another receiver that can stretch the field a little bit. So again, the team building of this is going to be a lot of fun. And frankly, Matt Ryan got benched because the owner benched him, because Jim Irsay's been out of his mind lately. I couldn't believe when he was like 63 years old. I'm like, what do you mean this guy's like a decade older than me? He rode hard and put up wet. He looks like he's 90 years old. Sounds like it too.
He's been in the business a long time.
But he's partied a lot harder than I have. I promise you that. But Matt Ryan came back and he's played well off and on a little bit behind that offensive line, but they love him. The teammates love him. The fans love him. The coaching staff love him. They love him up there. And while Matt Ryan was a little bit polarizing because of, 15 years of quarterback for a team that hasn't won a Super Bowl, that's going to happen. Nobody doubts Matt Ryan, the person. Everybody pretty much wants him to succeed, except for the people saying, I told you he was washed. They don't want him to succeed, but most rational people do.
Is Matt Ryan a Hall of Famer?
I think so.
Yeah,
I think so. He's going to have the numbers. I mean, if he finishes this year, he could climb into the top 5 all time in passing. 4-time Pro Bowler, MVP. And again, we're talking about the Atlanta Falcons here. He didn't go to the San Francisco 49ers or the Dallas Cowboys or the Green Bay Packers or the New York Giants or, even the Chicago Bears. The Atlanta Falcons, before Arthur Blank bought the team, had the record for the most consecutive years without back-to-back winning seasons because they'd never done it. It was 40 years without having back-to-back winning seasons. I mean, Matt Ryan oversaw the golden age of Falcons football. This is like taking the Detroit Lions. If Matthew Stafford played 15 years there, is Calvin Johnson a Hall of Famer? He didn't win anything. Hell yeah, he is. Is Barry Sanders a Hall of Famer? We already know the answer to that. No, they're not. He's not those guys. Those are two of the best to ever play it. But Matthew Stafford probably punched his ticket by going to LA, and getting a Super Bowl. Matt Ryan is a very, very good quarterback for a long time, playing for a franchise that's been the dregs of the NFL, for a bottom 5 franchise of the NFL since its existence.
Well, it's sometimes it's not. It's always about where you get drafted. Location. It's not just true in real estate. It's also true in the NFL. And you can, even if you craft out a really good career, sometimes the organization you play for, the franchise you're with, can take it a different direction and you can have a big impact on your career. Let's just go into Sunday now. What's your prediction for Sunday? You're looking at these two teams. They're very similar, which in the direction in which they're going. How do you see? I think right now the Bears might be 3-point dogs on the road, but that you get 3 for being on the road. So what do you see this? How do you see this playing out?
I think that's about right. This is the third time the Falcons have been favored this year, and the first time when it wasn't against the Carolina Panthers. I just don't think this is a great matchup for the Bears. Again, what the Falcons want to do is run the ball right at you. They're not being sneaky with their running game. It's not a bunch of, here, take the cheese, I'm going that way. We're coming right at you. And to my eye anyway, it looks like that's really the weakness of the Bears. The front 4, front 5, front 7 is susceptible to the run. If the Falcons can run the ball, they're tough to beat. There's going to be some points in this one. I think it's going to be a 1-score game. It's going to come down to the end. Younghoe Koo kicks a field goal or something, but I think like 26-24 could go either way. I'll give the nod to the home team, who I think has a better matchup.
Makes sense. And if both these teams run the ball like they want to run the ball, this might be a 45-minute game by the time it's all said and done. So it could be a quick one, could be a track meet, but it could be an interesting game like that. Hey, Scott, before we get you out of here, you have so much stuff going on, a lot of great content out there. Please let our viewers and our listeners know where they can see your stuff, how they can interact with you, and just learn a lot more about the game, because that's where you provide.
Best way out, because I'm always in the community on my YouTube channel. It's just youtube.com/Scott Kennedy is where you can find me. And I've got, let's see, how many draft picks did I get from the Bears last year? 5 or 6 of them, highlights from the Senior Bowl. I'll be at the Shrine Bowl again this year. I'll be at the Senior Bowl again this year. That, like I said, the team building aspect. When you grow up a Falcons fan in the 80s, you learn to watch the draft. They had one winning season. I was 7 years old in 1980, 17 when the decade was over. Formative years. They had one winning season that decade, 1980. That was it. So you learn to become a big fan of the draft. So I follow it again. And, being director of scouting for so long, I've done NFL draft and rankings. And I always say you end up rooting for the names on the back of the jerseys more than the name on the front of the jerseys. If I say Braxton Jones is a steal at left tackle, I love his bounce, his arm length, his athleticism. By God, I want him to be a success. I don't care where he goes. So I'm around all the time. Hit me up in the comments on the videos. I'll see it and I'll answer and I'll respond. You can find me at Twitter at Scout Kennedy. That'll always have links to where I'm spending my time too.
Excellent stuff, Scott. Thank you so much for being on. And like I tell all of our guests, we're going to catch up with you when the Falcons and Bears inevitably meet in the NFC Championship game when they're playing for that Super Bowl spot, whether it be next year or the year 2055. But we appreciate you being on here so much. Really informative stuff. And we'll talk to you down the road.
Thanks for having me. We'll see you again soon.
Sounds great. We'll be back with more Buffone 55 right after this.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Buffone 55. I am Aldo Gandia. Alyssa had to take care of some family business, something unexpected, and we wish her very well and her family very well. So we're moving on to B55. That's where I am going to ask John 5 questions, and he has 55 seconds to respond to each question. This, of course, is his way of honoring Doug Buffone, who played 15 seasons for the Chicago Bears and wore number 55. John, how are you?
I'm doing pretty well. I'm trying to get in mid-season form. It's a season of attrition, you know. It's just who's healthy, not who's best. And so I'm trying to just keep going.
Indeed. All right. Well, let's talk. Let's get to our first question, which has to do with last Sunday's game. The Bears' loss to the Lions was, of course, very, very frustrating. And it seemed like they had every opportunity to win. And somehow, some way, Dan Campbell got his first road victory as a head coach, and he did it against our Bears. So I got to ask, how hard did you take the loss? And you've got 55 seconds to give me a response that I'm sure would take more than that under normal circumstances.
That's why we do this show. Well, it was frustrating. The Bears have a late lead and the defense falls apart. Justin Fields throws an unfortunate pick six and Cairo Santos misses an extra point. This is one of those winnable games that you see on the schedule that you look at and think, hey, this could be a culture builder, but they fell short. But listen, after a day or so, you put things in perspective and you realize that losing this game is not going to wreck the franchise. It certainly didn't stunt Justin Fields' growth. And if you're into that whole draft position argument, I think winning and losing this game was a difference between something like 10 spots in the draft. So while I was mad they lost and I was mad that the Lions fans had their weird day in the sun, I certainly didn't carry this loss into Tuesday, and I'm certainly not carrying it into this show as we record it. We knew this was going to be a rough season. This one stings a little bit more because it was one of the few games you look at the schedule and expect to win, but I don't think it's going to be the sole reason they don't make the playoffs in 2022.
You know, after the game on Buffone 55, or excuse me, Bear Football, I mentioned that I think that a lot of fans are overlooking the fact that the Detroit Lions have a really good roster. It's not, there's certainly some big holes, but they've got a lot of talent on this team. And so for people to say, oh, we lost against the lowly Detroit Lions and so forth, yeah, you don't want to lose against anybody. But to denigrate what the Lions have built from a roster standpoint, I think is ill-advised. And so while I'm not happy with the loss, I also respect the fact that they lost against a team that's got some good talent and matches up pretty well against the Bears.
Yeah, I mean, they were the scrappy, fun pick at the beginning of the year. Remember, if they got that Hard Knocks boost that everyone starts paying attention to them, and so they do have some talent. They've been banged up by injuries quite a bit, but they have talent across the board, and they've spent a little bit of money, or at least they have some money wrapped up in their team, unlike the Bears. So I get it. It's just it's hard to say that it's hard to say that, oh man, the Lions are going to beat us. It's just that's never, out of all the teams that the Bears play, you can always think that the Lions is a winnable game.
Indeed. All right, let's get to number 2 on our list of 5 questions. You know, one thing that didn't disappoint Bears fans was the play of Justin Fields, and the national media now has begun changing its tune on the second-year quarterback. Earlier this week, ESPN's Dan Orlovsky said that Justin Fields could be mentioned in the MVP conversation. Now, John, that's pretty high praise. Do you think there's any shot of Fields making noise in the MVP race, or is this just hyperbole? 55 seconds, all yours.
Well, the short answer is no. They're not going to give the MVP to a quarterback on a team that potentially has a top 10 draft pick. Now, don't get me wrong. I love what Justin Fields is doing, and Bears fans have every reason to be excited. He is turning into one of the most dynamic playmakers in the NFL right now. He's breaking records and putting a ton of highlights on tape. But for me, it's just a nice breath of fresh air for people not to be talking about the Bears should seriously consider taking a quarterback in the 2023 draft in the first round. I think we can probably probably stop with that nonsense. Are there things that Justin Fields can work on and clean up? Absolutely. Have we scratched the surface of his potential enough to let go of this notion that any other young quarterback would have done better with this team in 2022? I think so. So while I don't think he gets mentioned in the MVP race, unless it's Orlovsky, I'd rather have that extreme conversation than the other extreme conversation the Bears have to use their first round pick on a quarterback.
There you go. I think if anything, he deserves to be mentioned as Offensive Player of the Year in the NFC. I don't think he'll win that either, but who knows? If he continues in the next 7 games at the pace of accumulating rushing yards, he's going to shatter records, and then Offensive Player of the Year is worth talking about. But MVP, I agree with Cliff Victoria in the chat, who says Justin is at least a year away from MVP contention. But what do you think about him potentially being the Offensive Player of the Year, John?
I'd say there's an outside chance. I still think they probably give that to a team that's going to be a playoff, contender. But he is on track, I believe, to break Lamar Jackson's single season record rushing for a quarterback. So if you do that and then throw in some other, maybe he throws, if he gets his touchdown count up and passing the ball, maybe, but we know what the MVP is never the actual most valuable player across any sport. It's never who the most valuable is, because basically it's the best quarterback. It's the best player on the best team. That's what the Heisman goes to. That's what the MVP goes to a lot of the time. So it's never like the actual, like, who is, let's do these quantum physics to figure out who is the actual most valuable player to their team. It's always just going to be who has great stats on a great team. And I think that's usually what it comes down to.
Indeed. Now, if he is able to improve his passing yard stats, if he, let's say for the next 7 games, starts to average 250 yards passing, then, who knows? Offensive Player of the Year, King of the United States, or Chicago.
He could probably get mayor of Chicago the next day.
Absolutely. Hands down. There's no doubt about it. All right. Question number 3. Speaking of the offense, one thing Bears fans were pretty upset about was the lack of participation of newly acquired wide receiver Chase Claypool in Sunday's game. Claypool played just 19 snaps against the Lions after playing 26 in the first game against Miami. John, what's your take on Claypool's lack of usage so far? 55 seconds are on the clock.
This may surprise some people. Look, I know patience is not one of my strong points, so I'm not going to hold it against anybody for being irritated. I was at Soldier Field for Chase Claypool's first game as a Chicago Bear, and I thought having him out there for 26 snaps and getting the ball in his hands a few times was good. But as for the game against the Lions, I'm not really sure what the strategy was. But look, up to that point on Sunday, the guy had been in Chicago for 12 days. Y'all know I love Madden, but real life ain't Madden. You just don't show up, know the playbook, have instant chemistry with your teammates, and start putting up 6 or 7 catches per week. It's not like baseball where you can go out and get a big hitter and they're impactful right away. In football, you're much more dependent on your teammates. If you want to criticize the amount of snaps, I completely get that. I just think the integration process can't be expected to take place in 12 days. Much like everything else with the Bears this year, I'm willing to let that play out, which is something I don't normally do, and I'm sure Bears fans don't like doing either.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think also that the team wanted to take a good look at Brian Pringle. And he was one of the bigger offensive acquisitions by this team. He was signed under a 1-year contract. I just confirmed that over on Spotrac. There was some talk on a previous show on whether he signed a 1 or 2 year contract, and so I think the Bears want to take a good look at him to see if he's going to be that third receiver to Darnell Mooney and Chase Claypool. And so, you've got to, at this point with this offense, the passing offense on this team, you got to take a look at some of these players. And I'm sure that N'Keal Harry is going to get his opportunities before the season's up to make a determination on him and seeing if that trade was worthy. And so I expect the offense, particularly the offense wide receivers for this Bears team, to have a lot of different combinations and us to get frustrated because it will appear that they're not trying to win, but instead trying to look towards the future. What do you think about that?
I think that's an interesting point because they got to decide whether or not they want to use a high draft pick on a receiver next year. And they did spend a 7th rounder on N'Keal Harry. They did bring in St. Brown and Pringle. And so they do probably want to see if they have their 3rd or 4th guy on the roster right now. And that could shape some of the decisions going into the offseason. And whenever you trade for a guy like Claypool and he's only been there less than 2 weeks, and you say, all right, you take another week to get acclimated with what's going on. We got to see what we got in Byron Pringle. We got to see what we got in Harry. I get that. So I think that, like I said, I hate saying let's just wait and see how it plays out because that's not a fun thing to say. But that's truly the mindset I got to have with this, because it's not like they're going to the playoffs. It's not like they're going to the Super Bowl. I'm just trying to get as much data as I can right now and look at things holistically at the end of the season.
Yeah, indeed. All right. On Sunday, I kept hearing these words.
This defense sucks.
I mean, over and over again.
This defense sucks.
And,
oh, man, I love that.
And on Monday morning, I heard them again.
This defense sucks.
And, of course, that is your uncle, Doug Buffone, talking about a team not too long ago,
yeah.
but it certainly applies today, right?
Yeah, I think that was that a Mel Tucker defense, I think I might have been talking about.
I think so. And so this defense, once again, is not performing well. They gave up 31 points, including a final 90-yard drive late in the 4th quarter. John, I know letting go of Robert Quinn and Roquan Smith was a big hit among Bears fans, but is there any hope for this defense the rest of the season, or are we going to be mired in mediocrity? And I'm being kind when I say that. 55 seconds are yours.
First off, that soundbite is just music to my ears. I could listen to that all day. But listen, I said this last week. This was going to be a concern for the rest of the season. They just can't get any pressure up front, and the secondary is being asked to cover receivers for way too long. And it's incredible that we're having the conversation about the Bears' offense having to keep the team in games now. Which, by the way, when people say Justin Fields is putting up empty numbers because he can't win games, do you want him to play linebacker? Does he play 3 technique on the line? In the last 4 games, the Bears have averaged 31 points on offense. In any other conversation, if you said your team was scoring 31 points per game and you're losing, you probably wouldn't be blaming the quarterback, but here we are. But in the same 4-game span, the Chicago Bears defense is giving up over 32 points per game. So this is what they're going to have to overcome for the rest of the year. However, I will say Jack Sanborn had a pretty solid game, 12 total tackles, 2 sacks, and an interception that should not have been called back. So maybe they found something there. He's not an athletic freak, but he's got it between the ears and he knows where to be.
He does have tremendous instincts, and it's going to be fun to watch him over the next few games. You know, as offensive coordinators start to acquire tape on players, they sometimes figure out a way to exploit their weaknesses. We'll see if Sanborn's fantastic instincts can be overcome with good scheming. So that's one thing I'll be watching about this defense. What other aspects of this defense are you focused in these remaining 7 games? What do you want to examine? What questions are you hoping will be answered?
I think we got basically our answers on the front 7. They need an overhaul. They need to build that up through the draft and go out and get some free agents. I do want to see Jalen Johnson for the rest of the year because something doesn't look right there. I don't know if he's still banged up. I think it's an oblique or something of that nature where he's dealing with an injury maybe, and that could be slowing him down. But also, I just want to see the progression of the 2 high draft picks back there with Brisker and Kyler Gordon. I think they're going to be very important parts to this defense moving forward because I don't know how they're going to completely revamp the defense, but they're going to need playmakers back there with Eddie Jackson and Brisker, and I think their safeties are taken care of for a while. But I am interested to see how the secondary works. Now, you don't get a very good look at that whenever they're asked to cover guys for 7-8 seconds, but we'll see. Then, like I said, I think the secondary is pretty well taken care of. At least the base is. I don't know what else we can really learn from the front 7, and unless Jack Sanborn just turns into a wrecking machine. But I think that teams are eventually going to try to stretch the field out and try to make him go side to side a little bit more.
Indeed. All right, our final question. Let's turn off the clock for this one. Let's not forget about this game on Sunday. In fact, you mentioned it with our guest. The Bears opened up as a 3-point road underdog, and there's a bit of an interesting storyline, and that is, of course, former Bears GM Ryan Pace is now a senior personnel executive with the Falcons and seems to have a lot of sway over there. Do you think that aspect adds any juice to this matchup for Bears fans or for Pace himself? After all, there are quite a few former Bears now on Pace's Falcons. Forget about the clock now and take it away.
This one doesn't really move the needle for me. I'm trying to move on from that chapter of my life. I think this might mean more to Ryan Pace than it does to the Bears or Ryan Poles. Pace saw Poles systematically bust down every pillar that he built throughout his tenure, trading Mack, trading Quinn, trading Roquan, acquiring more draft picks to overhaul the roster. Meanwhile, you can't tell me Ryan Pace doesn't have a big say-so in roster moves in Atlanta, because listen to some of the names on the current Atlanta roster. Damiere Byrd, Jermaine Ifedi, Elijah Wilkerson, Abdullah Anderson, Nick Kwiatkowski, all former Bears that joined the Falcons this year. They also signed Eddie Goldman back in the offseason, but then he retired. So Pace clearly still believes in his system and his players. So maybe he and some of those players have an emotional investment in this game, and they'd like to see some of the old Bears beat some of the new Bears. But as far as I'm concerned, it's just another team. But boy, I'm sure there's going to be some fun storylines on Sunday. We'll be back with more Buffone 55 right after this. Welcome back to Buffone 55. It's time for Buffone's Basement, where Aldo and I just chew on all of that fun Bears talk with anything and everything. Aldo, how you feeling tonight, bud?
I feel good. You know, we talked about this after Bear football, and we were talking about potential wins the rest of the way. And I said, I don't care. And I don't want that to mean that I don't care if the Bears win or lose. But I have a bigger picture now in mind for this Chicago Bears team. And so while the losses are still going to be a dagger to my heart, I am much more focused on the parts of this team so that we can continue this rebuild and make sure that it's successful. And there's a lot of questions ahead. You know, can we trust Ryan Poles to make these player personnel decisions that are going to impact the future? It appears that we have our franchise quarterback, but can Ryan Poles, is he capable of improving this offensive line, of getting the necessary weapons for Justin Fields, and really improving this defense that has now become among the worst in the National Football League?
And it's something that we've been saying for a couple weeks now. After they trade Robert Quinn, they trade Roquan Smith. It's now all of the pressure and all of the spotlight is on Ryan Poles. You have knocked everything down, and everything you do now is going to be your legacy. Everything you do is going to be under a microscope to say, what are you going to do with this pick, or who are you going to get in free agency, or how are you moving this piece around? Which is fine, because I'm still confident in Ryan Poles, but now it's like there's no one else to blame now. If it falls apart, it's on you. This is Ryan Poles' show now. He took it all the way down to the studs, and it's his job to build it back up. So we'll see what he can do. And one of those pieces he's going to have to make a decision on this offseason is David Montgomery, because obviously he's a great running back, and what he's done for the Bears organization has been great. But he's up after this year with his contract, and they got to decide whether Khalil Herbert is the guy, or they need to bring Monty back. And with Khalil Herbert out, this gives David Montgomery another opportunity to say, look, you need me as the one, because look what I can do. What are your thoughts on this this at least 4-game stretch here that Montgomery is going to be the lead back, and what it could mean for his future in Chicago?
I think this is the perfect audition for that contract. You know, he's got 7 games, 4 of them, or he's going to get, you know, probably the vast majority of snaps. I know Treston Ebner will get several snaps, but if David Montgomery can go out there and get 20 snaps rush for 100 yards, score a touchdown. On average, for these last 7 remaining games, I find it very, very difficult for the Bears not to try really, really hard to sign him to a contract. Now, Spotrac has his market value at $9.9 million for season. That's not going to happen. I don't think any NFL team will pay David Montgomery that, and I don't mean that as a shot at Montgomery. I mean it because the running back market, I'm surprised Spotrac would list that kind of number, because I don't think the running back market demands that, even for some, I don't even know if Saquon Barkley will make that kind of money, and he's a free agent at the end of the year. I think that for $4 or $5 million, 2 or 3 years, with a good percentage of that guaranteed, might bring him back to Chicago, and that would be a great thing because he's beloved by his teammates. He is a team leader. He helps other players become better because of what he does and what he says, and you can't underestimate that enough. I understand that running backs have become kind of a dime a dozen, but once in a while you make an investment in a running back and he doesn't show up to play. David Montgomery always shows up to play.
Yeah, and I think that he's not $9 million. I just don't see that going on the market. And you factor in all of the free agents. Unlike the wide receiver market, the running back market this year is actually quite plentiful. Just throwing out some names of guys who could potentially be free agents after this year: Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, Miles Sanders, Tony Pollard, Raheem Mostert, David Montgomery, Devin Singletary, James Robinson, Rashad Penny, Kareem Hunt, Damian Harris, Melvin Gordon, Darrell Henderson. All these guys are serviceable running backs here. So you can't tell me that, well, we got to go up and we got to pay $9 million for Montgomery, and then everything else is going to fall off. The market dictates what your price is. And so if a team says, okay, we're not going to pay that for Montgomery, we'll go out and get a Tony Pollard, or we'll go out and get a Josh Jacobs because I can get him for $3 million cheaper, and their production might be similar. That's from a team that's looking to add a free agent, not necessarily the Bears trying to re-sign that. So I think that it all depends on what the market is that year. And if there's a lot of, if just like wide receivers, I think Allen Lazard is probably going to get paid this year because he's the only one that has any talent in that wide receiving free agency list. So it all depends on who's up at that time and what the market is and what teams are incredibly thirsty for a running back, which, a lot of teams might just say, we're not going to pay for any of these guys. We're going to draft somebody. So it'll be interesting to see how that market plays out. And I think Montgomery there's always that potential that you take a hometown discount to say, hey, lock me up for 3 years and, give me, $6 million a year, $3 million, 3 years, $18 million. And I'd be okay with that. But there is some good talent out there this year. And if Poles just wants to, stay with this, frugal mindset, he must just say, you know what, we're going to take somebody in the 4th round and see if they can get a Jordan Howard type guy who was there in the 4th round, who had a big bruising back, who couldn't really catch a cold but still ran the ball pretty well. So right. There is some potential out there. So we'll see. But like you said, great opportunity for him to audition because with Khalil Herbert out, he's going to be the lead back there. So let's turn our attention now to Justin Fields, because everyone likes to talk about Justin Fields, myself included. As he continues to do this, there's still people, and I know you gotta be able to have conversations on some of these debate shows. You gotta be able to take somebody. It's always counterpoint on a lot of this stuff. So sometimes I don't believe these people actually believe what they're saying, but at the same time, it's just he hasn't proved anything because he's not winning, and it kills me that wins are all of a sudden like the biggest quarterback stat you can have. Whenever you look at the Bears defense and how they're underperforming, you're going to hold that against your quarterback who has absolutely nothing to do with the amount of points that you're giving up. So what do you think it actually takes for Justin Fields to turn that? And now it's getting there, but to turn the course on that national media where it's just like, you know what, the Bears don't got to worry about quarterback anymore. They got theirs.
Yeah, I think we're already there in terms of the national media. I mean, they're overreacting a bit to, because of the spectacular plays that Justin has delivered. And he deserves praise, but he does have to improve in certain areas. And that is primarily the passing game, but also in finishing games. And it's something that he's been talking about in his last 2 or 3 press conferences. You've got the ball, you've got 2 minutes left, you've got to make plays. And he threw a terrible interception against the Detroit Lions that cost them that game. I mean, I hate to phrase it that way because there were other reasons too why the Bears lost. But as a quarterback, as a franchise quarterback, when you've got the ball in your hands and you've got an opportunity to win this game, that's what separates the top quarterbacks from the so-so or good quarterbacks in this league. You make it happen. And so he still has to climb that mountain, so to speak. And, and we need to see him start passing for 200, 250, 275 yards per game. And I think that's coming. A lot of that was listening to JT O'Sullivan. He was a guest on the Hogan Johns podcast. And he was talking about how he sees absolutely no separation from the wide receivers. So this is not all on Justin Fields. When you have a respected tape analyst talking about the Bears wide receivers just not achieving the type of separation that Mr. Sullivan is seeing from tape of the 31 other teams in the NFL, then that has to be taken into consideration for the fact that Justin is not achieving the passing numbers that other quarterbacks are doing. But he's on his way there. I saw some tremendous plays this week where he kept his head, his eyes downfield as the pressure was coming in all around him. He stayed in the pocket, made some nice throws and so forth. So it's there. It's just some more patience and some more weapons around him, and it will come. And
it's interesting to me that for all off season and basically throughout the season, everyone's talking about how bad the Chicago Bears receivers are and how it's the worst receiving core in the league, and they didn't give Justin Fields any weapons, they didn't give him any chance to succeed, and then you're gonna crap on him because he's not racking up 300 passing yards a game now. So it's like, okay, you said he didn't have any weapons, and now that he's finding a way to win, or he's not finding a way to win, but he's finding a way to score points. It's like, well, no, you're not doing it the right way. So you're never going to win with some arguments there, but yeah. I think that he has another opportunity here to take a next step in solidifying his role as the franchise quarterback. And like I said, we really can't judge a whole lot until 2023, whenever some of that $100 million is spent in free agency, and hopefully the defense isn't giving up 32 points per game. Oh, no, I did want to talk about the draft a little bit, not because of what the Bears are going to do, but what they could potentially, the situation they could potentially find themselves in if they do have a top 10 pick. And there are going to be some quarterback hungry teams this year, and in a relatively okay quarterback draft. Would you be okay with the Bears trading back from, let's just say 9 to 20 or 9 to 17?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I would. The question is there a player in this draft that could immediately transcend the offense or the defense from good to great or average to good, or essentially just take that next step forward? So you would hate to bypass on that one player to acquire an additional draft pick in the second round or the third round. Now, an evaluation has to be made as to, how many needs does this team have and what can free agency do to address those needs. That's really the first step to answering that question. With over $100 million in cap space, if Ryan Poles does this right, he could get to that position in the draft, or he could entertain that and not feel like, well, I'm bypassing a great player at this position that could really help us, but I'm picking up additional resources that I know are going to really help this team a bit more. So I think that's the question, is first, what happens in free agency? And then that question can be better answered.
Yeah, for me, it's almost like, what's the haul? What are you getting? Because if someone says we're going to move up and we're going to give you a first next year and we're going to give you a third, or we're going to give you a third this year, I just feel like, man, that's a lot of extra ammunition for a team that needs a lot of help. So I feel like
like you said, it all depends on if you're in love with a guy, then you don't trade. But if you're thinking, well, this would be great, but man, we got an extra first round pick next year, we got an extra third round this year, and all of a sudden we can start plugging holes. So I can understand both, but I guess it's going to come down to what their position is. If it's me, like you said, if it's a guy that says that's our biggest need and he's the best player at that position in this draft, then okay. Go fill that hole. And if it's a 3 technique guy, go get him. But if you're between two guys and maybe it's 2 different positions, then you're like, well, we like this receiver, but we like this D lineman. You know what? If you're not sold on any of them 100%, then go and trade back. And maybe somebody falls to you that you didn't think would fall to you at 16, 17, or 18. Then you get a great player anyway, and you get an extra first round pick and an extra third round pick. So I can see both sides, but it's going to ultimately it'll come down to where they're actually picking. And because the thing about who's going to be some of those quarterback hungry teams this year, I think there's a real potential that Vegas is done with Derek Carr. They could potentially move on from him, and McDaniels can go get a quarterback that he really likes. I think that the Panthers are going to be in that market. I think the Texans may be in that market. I think the Commanders may be in that market. There's going to be probably at least 4 or 5, 6 teams that would love to get a quarterback this year. And so we'll see. And hell, the Steelers are talking, not the Steelers themselves, but Steelers fans are talking about going up and getting a quarterback after drafting Pickett this year, which give the kid a chance. I realize he's got weapons around him. It just, you can't have, I know what the Cardinals did with the whole Josh Rosen and Kyler Murray thing. I don't think Kenny Pickett's that bad that you have to boot him after 1 year. But my point is, you're going to see some quarterback hungry teams go, and potentially Detroit. But again, they could be going up to get a quarterback. So we'll see. We'll see how that works. I love the draft. I love wheeling and dealing. That's why I love franchise mode on Madden so much. So we'll see. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, the Bears, I'm a little bit worried about Ryan Poles, but I keep telling myself, this year he will finally have the scout team in place. He had his first draft was basically with all the Bear scouts, and he spoke proudly about them. But he has made some changes since then, and he's got now he will have had a full year of working with this scouting team. And so this draft here is really the one where he's got to have a high percentage of successful picks. And there is something to say about, keeping the higher picks in your draft and not accumulating more picks, because in some cases, you're accumulating mediocre players or average players at best. And what this team needs most of all are superstars. They need to have those blue chip players. And those blue chip players are usually found in the first round and in round 2 and 3. And when it comes to day 3, finding a blue chip player is very, very difficult. It's a needle in a haystack.
I agree. And I wanted to go to Clip's question. How does a 2023 first round and a 2024 first round sound for trading down? That depends on, for me, that would depend on how far you're trading down. If you're picking at 9 and someone's moving up from 14 and they're going to give you a first round pick and they're desperate and they really want this quarterback and they're in love with that quarterback and they're afraid someone's going to take him between that 9 and 14 range, or someone else is going to jump in. So they're going to go way over the top and say, hey, switch us from 9 to 14 and you can have next year's first. I'm fine with that. You're moving 5 spots, and one of those picks is going to be a quarterback. So that you weren't going to take anyway. So I would absolutely go with that. Now, if it's just a first rounder and you're moving from 9 to 20, 21, it's still enticing, but it also depends on who you're trading with. Because if it's a good team, and that could be a high first rounder, there's so many nuances of that I hate just committing. I'm like, absolutely, I do it, because there's so many things, so many reasons why I wouldn't do it as well. So exactly. It really depends on the situation, but it also depends on how many spots you're moving down. I do want to talk about the remaining schedule, although I don't know if you have your spaceship graphic available.
I do.
I do want to talk about the last remaining schedule and how many games we see on there potentially being wins, which I love prognosticating here. So the way that, Scott Kennedy was talking about, it's a bad matchup for the Bears with what the Falcons want to do this week. They're on the road, and the Falcons don't want to, no smoke and mirrors. They just try to run it down your throat. And so that's not gonna be a great matchup theirs, but we'll see. And then the Jets are better than a lot of people thought. I still don't love Zach Wilson. I think that they could potentially have a chance in that game. Green Bay looked a little bit better against the Cowboys, but the Cowboys did not look good at all in that game against Green Bay. So Aldo, since I'm going to ask you the same question, so I guess I have to be fair to myself and ask myself the same question. How many winnable games are left on this schedule? I'm going to say that they could potentially get 3 more wins there. What do you think?
Well, I think every game is potentially winnable, right? I mean, even week 16 against the Buffalo Bills is potentially winnable, highly unlikely, right?
Yeah.
But, I think at this point, you look at these next 2 road games, you're going up against teams that have good running games, and that's the Bears defense Achilles heel. So I find it very, very difficult to predict that they're going to win or even have a very good chance of winning on the road against 2 good running teams. The Packers, because I still, despite the Packers win over the Dallas Cowboys, I still think that this is a team that's imploding. There are even more and more reports that players in the locker room are upset with Aaron Rodgers and his lack of leadership or his style of leadership. And so there's a very good chance by the time week 13 comes around that the Chicago Bears could be really primed to win that game. And then, week 15 and 16, let's forget about that. You come to Detroit. Hopefully the Bears have the wherewithal to win that game. I predict that this Lions team is probably going to not be too interested in winning because they're going to want a higher draft pick than the Bears. And so that could be a very, very winnable game for the Bears on the road. And then week 18, if the Vikings have already clinched the division.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Exactly. Say the reason I said 3 games because I think they might be able to steal either the one from the Falcons or the Jets, and so that would give them 1. I can see them potentially beating the Lions, and I don't think the Vikings are going to have anything to play for in week 18. I honestly, I think they're going to have the division wrapped up. I don't know if that, I mean, they could maybe be playing for the number 1 overall seed, or maybe they already have that wrapped up although I don't think they have the tiebreaker on the Eagles, so maybe they do. So if the Vikings have nothing to play for, you get their backups, and maybe the Bears get another win there. That's why I said they could top out at 3 more wins. Could they lose every game? Yeah. Could they win 4 games? Yeah. Like what? But kind of, Aldo, you're contagious here when you're talking. Whenever I'm catching does it really matter? I hate that. I hate that I'm thinking that way, and I'm blaming you for that because I never thought I'd see the day where it's like, does it matter? No, for me, it's supposed to matter, but you got me thinking in a different way.
I know. I've never felt this way. I swear to you, John, I've been watching this team since 1968. Your uncle was playing on the team, and I fell in love with them when they were 1-13, and I was still hoping and praying that they would win. This is the first time in all my years of playing where I'm thinking to myself, it's not that important right now. What's important is developing these players and getting them set for 2023. And I feel
dirty. I feel dirty saying that. Like, what do you? I'm almost like I'm chastising myself. I'm like, what the hell are you talking? What do you mean you don't mind? You don't mind if with the wins, but it's true. I mean, we're looking towards the future a little bit. But before we look at the future, let's take one more peek to the past here, Aldo, because they are playing the Falcons, and we talked about Ryan Pace being a part of that organization. So I want to ask you, and I want to ask everybody in the chat room, what is your most memorable Ryan Pace memory? If you had to think about what your best Ryan Pace moment, is it him hiding behind the door? Is it him doing one press conference a year and not talking about anything else? What move or did you remember? Because for me, as much as it's fun to dump on Ryan Pace, the Khalil Mack trade, I remember where I was. I remember what I was doing. I was at U-Haul. I was going to rent a U-Haul, and all of a sudden I get a text from my brother, and it says, "Oh my God, Khalil Mack," and that's all it said. I'm like, what? So I looked up and I got on Twitter real quick. I'm like, oh my God. And I'm in Pennsylvania getting a U-Haul, by the way. So they don't give two craps about this, but I'm saying, oh my God, the Bears got Khalil Mack. And the lady's like, okay, what size truck do you want? Do you want like the 18 or 22? I'm like, I need a minute here. But I do remember that very, very specifically, like, where were you at when the Khalil Mack? Now, did it equate into a Super Bowl? Did it equate into, the best defense of all time? No, he was really exciting for a few games, especially that game against Green Bay. And it was like, it really got the blood pumping and it was really exciting. But yeah, that was in the moment, that was something. How about you, Aldo? Anything come to mind?
Yeah, I tell you, I immediately, my knee-jerk reaction is to react to something negative that he did, but it is sobering to see some of the comments in the chat, like J-Rock says, the drafting of Justin Fields. And that clearly is a monumental moment in Ryan Pace's career as an executive in the National Football League. That was an outstanding move. The mistakes that he made with the Mitchell Trubisky trade and trading up one spot and then selecting the wrong quarterback of the top 3 quarterbacks available. That was equally bad, but I think he kind of made up for it in many respects, maybe with the drafting of Justin Fields. And so the acquisition of Khalil Mack, as you mentioned, was monumental. It was such a feel-good moment. I remember here at the bar room, we immediately put together a emergency broadcast, and we got the highest numbers maybe in our history because it was such a great moment. Fans are always more interested in what we do in the off season with player acquisition than sometimes the actual games themselves.
Well, I mean, when you're a Bears fan, you're not competing consistently, in the playoffs or anything. It's just like, well, the draft is your Super Bowl. The offseason is your Super Bowl because you're like, who are you going to add? Who are they going to draft? What are they going to do this year? So I get it. There's the era of transactions is what we look forward to. And Laz, I'm with you. That hair, for everything else, it was immaculate hair. So I can give Ryan Pace that much.
But I do have to say this because the probably the biggest thing, or one of the biggest things that bothered me about Ryan Pace was how he treated the coach that he hired or was forced to hire, John Fox, when he drafted Mitchell Trubisky. To not inform your head coach that you are going to select Mitchell Trubisky and that it becomes a surprise to him to him being the head coach, John Fox. It becomes a surprise when that player is selected, to me, is the ultimate model of cowardice. What are you, afraid to tell your head coach that I'm in charge and I know you want Deshaun Watson, but I want Mitchell Trubisky? That to me shows really, really inferior leadership on the part of Ryan Pace. And it's those things like that really rub me wrong about him. And I'm so glad he is no longer a part of the Bears organization.
And we can only speculate now, but if John Fox was forced on Ryan Pace, if ownership or whoever said, you got to hire John Fox, then you're already taking all the power away from your GM. And then, of course, if he's saying, well, I had no choice in hiring this guy, I'm not really going to even run things by him. I'm just going to go do these things and he's their guy. So we'll do that. So like that's a bad dynamic. If that's actually what happened, I have to put in that caveat. If that's actually what happened, then that's you're setting things up for failure anyway. The dynamic was going to be completely out of skew. There was never going to be the right hierarchy there to say, hey, GM, I know you're supposed to hire the coach, but you're taking this guy. You're going to have to make it work. And then the GM's like, well, does the coach actually outrank me then because he's appointed by ownership and not hired by me? Mm-hmm. So that was just a weird era there. The Fox era, that was just weird. Like I remember when they announced it, I was not blown away by it. I was just like, oh man, kind of a retread, and a guy that got fired after taking a team to the Super Bowl. There must be something not right there. So like, I never loved the fact that John Fox this seems like a nice enough guy, maybe, or a funny enough guy or whatever, but like, he just didn't seemed like he checked out. It just seemed like he got the head coaching job and he's just like, yeah, I'm the head coach, whatever.
Yeah, I think maybe part of that was because of the relationship with the general manager, Ryan Pace. He was, there are reports that they did not see eye to eye on a lot of things that were happening in closed doors at Hallis Hall. And so, he probably felt like, hey, I got a nice big fat contract. I'm going to ride this thing out. I'm going to fight for what I believe, but I know I'm probably not going to win against this guy. And if the general manager doesn't tell you who he's drafting, that is not a healthy relationship. And so, as much as I disliked the hire, certainly Ryan Pace wasn't doing him any favors at all by going behind his back and doing certain things. And, the other thing about that relationship that bugged me is that, I lost my train of thought. So
you said you were more like John Fox than because I remember him forgetting, like, saying the guy's names wrong. Did he say Jake Utler at one point? Yeah. Carlos Santos. Yeah, like he was always like, do you go to the facility? Do you know who you're coaching? Like,
John Fox and I have a lot more in common than I'd like to admit.
Forgetting guys' names, not knowing what's going on. He's like, whatever, I'm here. Isn't that enough? We're good. Exactly. All right, Aldo, you ready to close this out?
Yeah, I'd like to say one last thing. Applause for Cole Kmet. He is a guy who so many fans wrote him off immediately. I mean, he was drafted and he was 21 years old. He's going to be 24 next March. And what he is proving now is that he is a number one tight end, and he's only going to get better. I took a look at the stats before our show today, and he is not being targeted as much as he was last year. And so let's get him the ball even more and see what he can do. And that in turn is going to help the wide receivers get open more. I think defenses are overlooking what Cole Kmet can do to get open. And now, after scoring 3 touchdowns in the last 2 games, watch to see what the defense are going to do to take Cole Kmet away. And that should open up things for Claypool, Mooney, and whoever else is going to be starting at wide receiver for the team.
And Aldo, I was not a huge fan of the draft pick. I was not, and it wasn't anything against Cole Kmet personally. I didn't like going tight end at that position when I thought there was other things they could have got there. I did not love that they used their highest draft pick on a tight end after I think that was the year they went and got Jimmy Graham. And so then they paid him a ton of money, and then they drafted another tight end. I was not a huge fan of it, but you're absolutely right. He's finally turning the corner where he's becoming that very reliable tight end. I would love to see in free agency, maybe pair him with like a Mike Gesicki out of from Miami, and have a guy that can stretch the field vertically, and then have Cole Kmet doing his job. So that I think that there's still room there for some improvement as far as the roster goes. But you're right. Cole Kmet has become very reliable, has taken leaps and bounds of where he was. So it's good to see that progression. So all's well that ends well, so to speak. Aldo, what's going on with the bar room this week? How many we got? 95 shows, or what's going on?
Well, not quite that many, but tomorrow afternoon we've got Crosstown Crosstalk. Vinny Parisi will let us know on all the latest hot stove leak stuff. You know how baseball is. It's worthy. It's a worthy topic. 12 months out of the year, and so I'm looking forward to tomorrow's Crosstown Crosstalk with Vinny. And then tomorrow at 6 p.m., it is the Mac and Reed show. They're going to talk about Justin Fields and now his celebrity status in the National Football League and dig into that, but also talk about what the immediate future of the Chicago Bears could be the rest of the season. And so I'm looking forward to that show as well. On Sunday, we've got our full slate of shows, but also on Saturday, it's the weekend sports betting tips. This will be the last show for a couple of weeks because our good friend Johnny Santucci is going on a trip to Thailand. And so he's going to visit some in-laws and friends over there. So he'll be
the Philippines or Thailand.
I think he's going to Thailand first and then the Philippines.
Man, because he told me it was like a 3-week trip, so he could be going all over the place.
Yes. Good luck. I mean, not good luck, but good for him. I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
And he's taking the kids too. What a trip. So that's going to be outstanding. And then on Sunday, we got our full slate of programs that starts at 8 a.m. in the morning with Mike North, talking some sports betting and also his views on the Chicago Bears. And that includes all the way up until your show, John.
That's right. And so don't forget, as soon as the clock hits 000 on the Bears game, we'll go into Bear football. Tyler Ellis, myself, and Danny Shimon with Aldo running all the wires in the background. We'll give you raw emotion after the game. It's always a fun time, whether it's win or lose, and we appreciate all the people that join us in the chat room. They leave comments on the YouTube. Man, I'm getting old. On the YouTube. Make sure you check us on the YouTube, and then find us on the MySpace and all that other things that us kids are doing nowadays. Jeez, I am an aging millennial like you wouldn't believe. We do appreciate everybody who watches and listens, whether it's your first time or 55th time, whether you're watching the audio version, the video version, the podcast version, the live version. Appreciate each and every one of you. But that will do it for this edition of Buffone 55. For Aldo Gandia and Alyssa Barbieri, I'm John Buffone. We'll see you next time.
Take care, everybody.